Pao Pao Cafe is perhaps one of the most famous stages in Fatal Fury, with guest appearances in multiple games such as King of Fighters, Capcom Vs Snk, and most recently Street Fighter 6. Pao Pao Cafe, translated from Portuguese, means bread coffee, though personally I think there wasn't any sort of special meaning behind the name. SNK probably just thought it sounded cool. We do see the kanji for Pao Pao Cafe in several stages, and when translated from Japanese, it doesn't make too much sense, hence I don't think it has some specific meaning. This chain has its roots in Southtown, but the Pao Pao Empire has expanded to different locations in Mexico and America, with there even being a Pao Pao resort. These stages are influenced by a variety of different cultures such as Chinese, Brazilian, and Mexican, often mishmashing to creative effect, which is very appropriate for a globe-trotting game. And even though this stage has the word cafe in it, honestly these environments are more like large restaurants, hotels, and casinos. This is a place where anyone, from villains to heroes, can swing by and stop in for a drink. This can especially be seen in our first appearance of Pao Pao Cafe in Fatal Fury, where we see a fancy, perhaps 5-star fusion restaurant. This area is pretty spacious, your character is in what might be the entrance on top of an elaborately designed carpet. Your characters can stand on either the upper or lower part of the carpet due to the series' unique 2-lane system. The stages in Fatal Fury are only accessible through arcade mode, however you can select the specific person and location you want to fight, making this process way easier than in certain games. The first Pao Pao Cafe is located in Southtown and owned by Richard Mayer. Richard himself is Brazilian, perhaps explaining the Brazilian elements of this stage. But as for the Chinese aspects, well, maybe the location of this restaurant was originally in Chinatown, and after Richard bought it, he might have decided to keep what was already there, but also add some of his own spin to it. Back to that Brazilian inspiration though, in the middle of the stage, the band here is a clear reference to the fighting style that Richard uses called capoeira. Capoeira originates from Brazil and is both a martial arts style and a form of dance. The style can be traced back hundreds of years where it was practiced by Black Brazilians. Originating as a type of street fighting, practitioners were often persecuted and even killed by the Portuguese government. Even after Brazil gained independence from Portugal, the new republic instated a permanent ban against capoeira in 1890. In the early 20th century, however, the fighting style was reformed by various individuals into more of a sport, and thus more socially acceptable to the government and among the people, having now exploded in popularity. These days, it's considered a national intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO and has since spread all over the world. Practitioners of capoeira often stand in a rota or a circle. However, the musicians playing music for capoeira rota are arranged in a row called a bateria. Apologies if I'm butchering these pronunciations. The green and blue instruments are called berimbau, which are string instruments attached to a gourd and played with a stick. You can also see this in another fighting game series where Eddie from Tekken plays this in his intro in Tekken 8. You also have one atabaki, which is a hand drum, and 3 panderos, similar to a tambourine. Outside of these instruments, you have others standing around clapping and singing, with everyone wearing the traditional white pants of capoeira called abada. On the other hand, the architecture of this restaurant is distinctly Chinese, with elegant red fencing lining the room and balcony above. There is quite a crowd here, with people watching from every corner, standing in green doorways, which might be private rooms or booths. You also have 2 yellow dragons wrapped around columns, clutching pearls in hand. As mentioned before in previous videos, these are representations of wisdom and spiritual power. The columns also have jewels in the center, adding to that more elevated vibe. The 3 green dragons on the right look envious of the yellow ones, maybe coveting those pearls for themselves. On the opposite side, you have a large stack of barrels, perhaps containing alcohol. There's a chandelier almost shaped like a UFO, maybe a bowl chandelier, with little light bulbs dangling from the rim. It's hanging from a lattice of what looks to be bamboo ceiling. There are stage lights here, indicating that shows seem to be pretty common fare. Richard can also grab onto the lights and kick you, making this perhaps his only appearance as a fighter and opponent in the series. While having a CPU interact with a stage was innovative for the time, Vega's stage from Street Fighter 2 predates this one by a few months. Music-wise, the song is clearly capoeira influenced, where you hear the sounds of those traditional instruments along with a man singing, accompanied by an echoing choir. In addition, you can also hear synth, gong, and sitar, which gives this piece slightly more of an Indian vibe to me as well. And if you listen closely, you can hear people singing the word capoeira in the song, which is pretty on the nose. The tone of this stage is elegant and elevated, with a very classy interior that reminds me of an extremely expensive restaurant with live music. I love the interplay between Brazilian and Chinese cultures, which is very creative. Despite the more traditional instruments and singing I can hear in the stage song though, I don't believe the song playing on stage is meant to be coming from the band. There are some added instruments like sitar and gong which aren't typical of capoeira music, as well as what might be children echoing the main singer, which we don't see on this stage. My only small little critique here is that I feel like it could have been better to incorporate more East Asian instruments besides just the gong. This stage has a lot of Chinese influence, and I think having a little more of that would really take this to the next level. There's also another version of the stage song, which was remixed in Smash Bros. Ultimate and is original to that game. It sounds very similar to the Fatal Fury song in the vocals, but the background instruments appear to be redone. There's more percussion, and they got rid of the synth underlying the entire original piece. There's also a newly added section where there's a key change and then an acoustic guitar solo, which comes off as a modern continuation of the first two. Despite these additions, tonally I still think it's very faithful to the original. Also, I would have loved for the SNK stage in Smash to have been Pao Pao Cafe instead of the King of Fighters Stadium. You would have been able to put all of the same cameos in the background, while also having a sweet place where all of the SNK reps could hang out regardless of timeline. Pao Pao Cafe also appears in Fatal Fury 2, not as a stage, but in an arcade mode cutscene for each character after their first victory. With this added screen, you can see that everyone in the cafe is watching your character fight, with the sounds of whistles and shouts cheering them on. I really like this little scene because Fatal Fury 2 is a fighter that takes place all over the world, and this cutscene shows that the entire population of Southtown is rooting for your character. Also, I assume that this is the same Pao Pao Cafe as the one in the original Fatal Fury. The second canonical location of the Pao Pao Empire is the aptly named Pao Pao Cafe 2, which first appears in Fatal Fury 3. This is the last Pao Pao Cafe with a number to indicate which location it is until Pao Pao Cafe 6. Location numbers 3 through 5 are never directly named, so we can only guess as to which locations are which, but I'll get into that later. Interestingly, the character select screen for this game bears a lot of resemblance to Pao Pao Cafe 1 with the intricate looking railings and balcony on the second floor, but this is just speculation. This new location gives off hotel and Las Vegas casino vibes given the sheer scale, with multiple areas to explore. Instead of Richard Mayer though, the second location is run by Bob Wilson, who you can fight on this stage. Bob was scouted and eventually trained under Richard, who was impressed by his capoeira skills. After Richard announced that he was moving to Southtown to open up a cafe, Bob decided to go and help him out, hence him becoming the manager of the second Pao Pao Cafe. As opposed to Chinese-Brazilian fusion though, this cafe has an Aztec or maybe generally Mesoamerican theme with some Brazilian aspects. For example, with the musicians wearing a bata pants and playing traditional instruments. They're standing on top of a red tarp, and the floor of this place is made up of emerald and violet triangle tiles that have this beautiful reflective quality to them. There's lots of lush greenery here with the palm trees and that more tropical ambiance, along with barrels in the foreground. Behind the musicians is a huge stone head with a nose ring, its mouth gaping open and spilling light into the room. Potentially this could be a reference to the Olmec colossal heads, which date back to at least 900 BC and are believed to be portraits of various leaders. Depending on the round, the lights here start off as blue, but then turn to gold in the second round, and then back to blue in the third round. Intricate stone columns serve as water fountains on either side of the band, which seems to be a bit of a commonality in the stage since there are multiple water displays scattered throughout. There's another rock formation with water behind Richard Mayer in a black vest and dress pants, standing with a woman who could be his significant other. You also have a chef holding a roast chicken, and someone who looks a lot like Kenzuo sitting on the ground, and Kyo flipping a coin in the back, but this game supposedly takes place before these characters were born, so So maybe these are completely different people, or perhaps this stage takes place at some unspecified point in time where they can all be here at once. There are stairs which presumably lead to the balcony above, where other onlookers watch the fight. Slightly to the right, a bar called, excuse me for this, Tezcatlipoca, who was a major deity of the Aztecs and associated with obsidian, the night sky, hurricanes, and change through conflict. On the other side, you have more members of the crowd down below as well as above on the balcony. There's a guy with a parrot and a woman that kinda reminds me of Leona standing next to another nice water installation. Similar to the giant head, the lighting in this area and the area to the left changes depending on the round. It's orange-red at first, then blue on the left and purple on the right in the second round, and then back to orange-red on either side in the final round. We also see the Pao Pao Cafe sign in neon alongside an exit one, which continues to be a motif to this day, though the design is slightly different from later games. The song that plays here is Bob Wilson's theme. In Versus mode, the stage seems to be based on whoever the challenger is, so you can only play on the Pao Pao Cafe stage in this mode when the second person hops in as Bob. Out of all the Pao Pao tunes though, this has the best song to stage vibe. It's electronic music with a syncopated synth melody and electric guitar, but has a tribal sound to it with a strong funky rhythm played through the percussion, shouting, and what sounds like a sitar. It's got a lot of energy but has an upbeat feel, much like what we know about Bob himself. I really love this version of the cafe. The theming here is absolutely impeccable, even just the colors of the floor convey this sense of luxury and nighttime vibrance. It's a very lush environment where the greens of the plants harmoniously blend in with the green of the flooring, and the added pop of color with the neon lights is just the cherry on top. It's definitely a place where I could see myself hanging out at night, drink in hand, and dancing the night away to live music. Switching series, our next Pao Pao Cafe is the Art of Fighting or Team Mexico stage in King of Fighters 94. It's interesting that the stage is associated with the Art of Fighting team, which consists of Ryo, Robert, and Takuma, so 2 of them are Japanese and the other is Italian. To me, I don't see any strong connection between these characters and Pao Pao Cafe, but maybe this is a case where they're trying out something different. During this time, SNK was doing a lot of stage intros which helped set the tone of the stage up perfectly. Before the match, you see the neon Pao Pao Cafe sign on a brick wall as the stage slides into view. I'm assuming that this area is the entrance of the restaurant or perhaps smack dab in the center of the room. The theming is largely Chinese with the red architecture, a giant dragon on the right maybe guarding a large pearl, and another one on the left circling a column while clutching a pearl in its talons. Being in Mexico though, you do see more of those fusion elements again with the checkerboard floor and the mariachi band. These musicians are wearing sombreros and charro suits, which were originally a sort of equestrian outfit, but has since evolved to become a symbol of national Mexican pride. Having a band is a must for this stage at this point, but the Brazilian musicians are out in favor of musicians playing traditional mariachi instruments such as guitar, trumpet, and maracas, but also some less common ones like large drums and what looks like banjos. Standing above them is a large chandelier which adds to that more opulent tone and spotlights above which illuminate your characters. Besides these elements, the stage is mostly comprised of an insane amount of crowd members going nuts in the background. Most of these are cameos from both Art of Fighting and Fatal Fury, which according to the King of Fighters Ultimate History book was meant to, quote, emphasize the rivalry between their game's characters, though there are other series that make appearances as well. On the right, you have Richard Mayer standing tall, wearing a white outfit and apron, next to Geese Howard from Fatal Fury, who's sitting at the table in a red suit. The person behind him is Billy Kane from Fatal Fury, but I almost never see him wearing a suit in that color. When looking for renders for a Billy in a suit, normally he wears a black jacket and pants with a blue dress shirt and tie. These villains being here is interesting because while never directly stated, their presence implies that Pao Pao Cafe is a neutral zone where everyone, regardless of allegiances, can just hang out. Billy standing next to Geese makes sense, but I'm not sure why Richard is right next to him as well. Maybe Geese funded this particular Pao Pao location, or maybe Geese is some sort of VIP or high roller here, or maybe Richard just doesn't care about him and just happened to be standing there watching the fight. Next to Billy, you can see the girl Terry was in love with in the first KOF OVA named Lily McGuire. She worked for Geese in the film, so maybe Terry hasn't even met her in this continuity to get her to change allegiances. Side note, this is also her first and last appearance in a video game ever. Towards the left, the man with the mask is Eiji Kisaragi from Art of Fighting, and directly above him is the character Kathy from Top Hunter and her partner Roddy from the same game. To Roddy's right is Toto, who is Kasumi's father, also from Art of Fighting, just swinging his sword around. He's pretty hyped for this match, looking like he's ready to fight, but unfortunately since Fatal Fury Special, he's been cursed to be a recurring background character for years to come. And joining the villains here below Toto is Mr. Big, a boss from the first Art of Fighting. In the far left section of the crowd, you have a bunch more Art of Fighting characters. First is Li Pai Long, standing firm next to this table. Nearby, though it's kinda hard to see, is Mickey Rogers, and someone who's not hard to find and standing next to him is Temjin, who's wearing a white tank top. Also, not cameos, but I really like these people in the chef outfits, which just goes to show that even the staff are watching this fight, so it must be pretty exciting. You also have a second row of people in the way back, some of which are holding maybe a bag or container of ingredients in the air, but not sure what. This additional row does a good job at adding depth to the background. There's a lot of cameos here, and the background, when you zoom in, is super pixelated, so there's definitely people I could be missing here. SNK stages are always so jam-packed, especially compared to early Street Fighter games. This helps really sell KOF as a celebration of SNK. Despite the mariachi band, the music being played is team-specific and is definitely not what these musicians would traditionally play, called ranchera music. Instead, you hear the Team Mexico song, which doesn't remind me of Mexico at all, really. Because the stage depends on who is player 2 in training mode or joins in as player 2 in versus mode, you won't be able to get on the stage and hear this song without fighting the Art of Fighting team. The music starts off with this very low-sounding synth melody and mechanical sound effects that, in my opinion, doesn't fit in well with the stage. It gives off very grungy villain vibes, and combined with the monotone red-gold palette, doesn't accentuate the celebratory atmosphere that the stage is meant to portray. The color palette also makes it more difficult to keep track of your character and can be a bit distracting. On the other hand, the energy from the people is off the charts, packed to the brim with fun cameos, and I would have loved to hear this reflected more in the music. As a whole though, given that this game came out in 1994, seeing what SNK could do with this stage is massively impressive. KOF 94 Rebout does a complete reboot in terms of direction, being much more of a modern, sophisticated museum and lounge where you take a journey through its multiple rooms, though it's still located in Mexico. I believe this is the same Pao Pao Cafes in KOF 94, since you see references to it in this stage, as if to show their customers how far they've come. And to that point, unlike previous versions, this stage uses 3D models and assets as opposed to sprites. Throughout the match, your characters are fighting on a lift, and honestly, I'm not sure what the value of moving around like this is besides looking cool. With it going everywhere, maybe it's specifically made for fighting or for a show, but who knows. While on the lift, you start off in front of a picture of the Pao Pao Cafe from KOF 94, illuminated by spotlights with a sign underneath. The platform then quickly lifts up and you move down a hallway with different bar and lounge areas, chandeliers and fans overhead. These small areas alternate with displays of Mexican art pieces with a sign underneath that says King of Fighters, almost like a museum of sorts. Now, this stage has a shit ton of cameos, both villains and heroes alike from multiple series. And trust me, I do not say this lightly when I say a shit ton. The amount here is absolutely ridiculous, and I can't believe that they were able to stuff so many of them in here. I will say though that all of the stages in 94 Rebout have similar amounts of people stuffed in each of them, so in general, this game just goes nuts. So, for the sake of not dying, if I don't mention the series the character is from, assume that it's King of Fighters. First off, in round 1, we have Billy Kane, Shermie, and Chris. Then in the middle bar area, you see Vanessa, Richard Mayer, and Bob Wilson, who are staples of this stage, and Ramon. To the left, there's Raiden, Rick Strode from Real About Fatal Fury 2, and Lynn. You also have Rock Howard, Marco, formerly known as Kushnud Butt, and also Malin jumping in the air. Then in the far left bar area, we have the USA announcer from KOF 94 named Cool Guy, and Weiler from Art of Fighting, Franco Bash and Lawrence Blood from Fatal Fury, and Mr. Big from Art of Fighting. Once the elevator loops back around, you see Lily Kane, Blue Mary, Vice, and Mature as you go in the reverse direction from which you came from. In round 2, you start from inside the bar, with your characters standing in front of a painting with portraits of Richard Mayer and Bob Wilson, though we do see these actual characters in the stage itself. These portraits are modified from their versus screen art from Fatal Fury 1 and 3 respectively. Adelheid Bernstein and Kula Diamond's mother figures Foxy and Diana are also standing nearby, along with B. Jeanette. Angel and Rose Bernstein are on the outskirts of the stage inside the bar areas if you look closely. Also, he's obscured, but you can see June from KOF 99 wearing his glasses. The platform then lifts upwards until you reach outside the building in front of another bar, where you can see Ness, who is the leader of the Ness organization. Once you get to the main strip past some ornate fences, you have even more bars on either side. There's Misty, an NPC from KOF 2001, Bob Wilson, Duke Edwards from Burning Fight, Psycho Soldier Kensuo, Smart Chang, Cool Choi, and another Benimaru, who are all striker assists from KOF 2000. Smart Chang and Cool Choi are alternate versions of Chang and Choi, and another Benimaru is an earlier concept version of Benimaru. Towards the back, you have Tizok, and finally Richard Mayer at the very end. In this area, you can see that Richard has waiters on either side, a mariachi band behind him, and a mirrored Pao Pao Cafe sign. There's a bright full moon and cityscape, which helps set the nighttime city ambiance well. Finally, in round 3, you take a similar but slightly different path that starts from the inside area, but instead it keeps going to the left past the lounges, loops back around to the outdoor bar, and then finally comes back to the Pao Pao 94 painting we saw at the very beginning. The cameos here are different once again, with Alfred from Fatal Fury on the left, Li Xiangfei and Gato on the right. Above the painting, Shingo is going pretty ham, while Iori stands stoically on the left. In the middle bar area, you have Kula Diamond and her robot partner Candy Diamond, Rocky from Robo Army, and Yashiro. After that, there's Mei Li and Baitang the Panda, who's Bao's striker in KOF 2000 in the next bar area over. From there, you continue to the left and travel up a dark elevator shaft, glancing at signs that say KOF in Mexico before looping back to the mirrored Pao Pao Cafe sign at the end of the outdoor bar area. Standing in front of this sign is Kaide from Last Blade and Ash Crimson. Further down the track is Kim Dong-hwan, who is Kim Cap-hwan's son. We see Rock Howard again, making him one of the only characters we see multiple times on the stage alongside Richard and Bob. You have Kim Soo-il from Kazuna Encounter and Leona and Shen Wu from KOF. Finally, back at the larger outdoor bar, Ness has been replaced by K49, and back inside in front of the Richard and Bob painting is Whip and Seth in addition to K-Dash. Very easy to miss, but Richard and Bob are here as well, though they're very cut off. I love the fact that this stage and game as a whole celebrates a series where every game up to this point has an appearance in some way or another. But can I just say, god damn, this took forever. I just mentioned something like 58 cameos, some of which were super obscure and took forever to research, and even then I could have missed some. This location can be selected when you choose a member of Team Art of Fighting, whether you're player 1 or player 2, but you have to pick your character second. The song you hear on this stage is a remix of the Art of Fighting team theme from KOF 94, where it's pretty much the same, but the synth instrumentation has been changed. It reminds me of something I'd hear in a factory or maybe a villain theme. I think something more cosmopolitan, energetic, or even Mexican could have worked better here. It doesn't really do a good job of selling that, again, celebratory attitude that the original 94 had. In terms of stage direction, the bar theme is great because it makes these characters feel more real and authentic, where after they're done battling evil, or being evil for the day, you can find them chilling with a drink at their local hangout. As mentioned before, Pao Pao Cafe seems to be a neutral zone where anyone can come. I will say that the Mexican aspects of the stage, like the museum, do feel a bit haphazardly thrown in. To me, the Mexican artwork clashes with the more modern and somewhat extravagant theming of the bars and paintings. I also think the whole platform aspect, while a clever way to show off a huge stage and shove in those cameos, is pretty weird in that it makes no sense why this would be here, other than as a way to maybe shuttle people around in a tour or showcase a live performance, but even then, I think that's stretching it, though the concept is a neat idea. However, I will take away points for the stage song. We're supposed to get super pumped up seeing all of these cameos from all of the KOF games up to this point, and I don't get any of that energy from the stage theme. It instead sounds ominous and serious and really nothing like a party. Yet another crossover series, we have the Capcom Vs Snk version of this stage. At the start, we see an intro cutscene of a red dragon eye, and then transitions outwards to the full stage. This sets up the location thematically as darker and more chilling than the usual colorful, bright energy of other Pao Pao Cafes. A spotlight illuminates your character standing on top of a yellow stone floor. However, outside of your fighters, the most prominent feature of this stage is the huge dragon statue in the middle. It's absolutely massive, taking up the majority of the stage and leaving little room for other elements. Its eye flashes throughout the battle, while its gaping maw almost looks like it's reaching towards you. Its talons are intimidating and sharp, with the right hand grasping a pearl of wisdom. Dragons are common elements in so many of these Pao Pao Cafe stages, since it's a very obvious, dramatic, and quick way to show Chinese influence. Besides the main one though, there are several smaller ones wrapped around pillars. With such a big difference in size, these little guys look kinda cute to me. Perhaps the reason why they're pointed towards the large dragon in the middle with their heads slightly raised is because they're paying respect to their ruler. On those same pillars, you can also see a more subdued nod to the stage name, with Pao Pao Cafe written in red script. There's a bar squeeze into the right corner, the surrounding customers dressed like they're going out. They're chatting while either standing or sitting, all while a waitress paces back and forth along the stage. I guess she's having a busy day given how quickly she's walking. The art style of these NPCs is quite realistic, which to be honest, doesn't really sit well with me. I think they're just a little too much when compared to the more cartoonish style of the fighters. It might also be because given how they look, I would expect some level of movement happening in the background. But outside of your characters, the waitress and the eye are the only real sources of motion since the crowd animation is extremely minimal. The song is a very electronic and synth-heavy piece, similar to other tunes from this game's OST. One thing that is different though is that I hear gong crashes thrown in occasionally, which elevates this from purely an electronic song to an electronic song with some fusion elements. Tonally, it's very energetic and edgy, with various percussion flourishes thrown in for good measure. While nothing about it really screams Pao Pao Cafe to me, it does make a good song for a fighter since it maintains this tense, fast-paced energy throughout, if not a bit forgettable. The dragon in the middle is quite intimidating and fierce, and throughout the entire match, you get the sense that it has its eye on you the whole time, just waiting for the best time to strike. Combined with the palette, which leans more towards subdued and darker yellow, green, and blue colors, and the edgier soundtrack, this Pao Pao Cafe stands out to me with its more serious ambiance. Given that it takes place in a shared universe and not just SNK, I think it makes sense to have this stage stand out with a more experimental vibe. Taking a completely different approach to Pao Pao Cafes of the past, this stage called Alley instead takes place outside of the restaurant at night, in an alley. The stage is located in America, potentially Southtown. It occurs at exactly 12:24 a.m., a pretty late time where most people would be home, hence some of the seedier vibes we get from this location. There's a large Pao Pao Cafe sign up above, which is slightly cut off and not the typical logo which we've seen before, as well as the word nightclub. Perhaps this is not a cafe location, but an offshoot one being Pao Pao Nightclub. Below that sign is a staircase presumably leading down to the entrance. The neon sign provides a nice pop of color, with the entire stage otherwise giving off a seedy and sketchy vibe. To that effect, the arcade mode intro screen even has the annoying sound of police sirens wailing, though this was removed in the console version for whatever reason. You see streetlights and graffiti plastered on walls and storefronts, and even the floor, along with graffiti art of Bob Wilson on the right side. There's a number of people just lurking around and watching the fight, although there are some really getting into it. On occasion, a motorcycle speeds through the stage very quickly, clearly not wanting to stick around. There are two pedestrian bridges, or maybe catwalks up above, that connect the Pao Pao nightclub building with another one containing a number of shops. There are even more people watching from above and additional neon signs as well. Even though the stage supposedly takes place in America, I'd bet money the design takes inspiration from somewhere else like Japan or Taiwan. Catwalks like these don't really exist in America, but possible this is a Southtown only thing, assuming that's where this takes place. For all we know, it could be somewhere completely different. The stage is pretty in line with my general thoughts about KOF 11 stages overall, which is that they're just okay. Given that the sign above says nightclub, you think it would be more bumpin' at midnight. Also, it would have been nice to include some more tropical details on the exterior of the building in some way to spice things up. The 2 levels concept is neat, but ultimately doesn't help this stage stand out in any way. This is probably my least favorite version, but to be fair, this one is barely a Pao Pao Cafe stage. It's almost like it was originally made for some other purpose, then at last minute got the Pao Pao label slapped on it just to say that this is Southtown. KOF 13 is a surprisingly modest take on a Pao Pao Cafe, but despite that, it's still pretty nuts. This version is mostly Chinese themed with some Brazilian nods and perhaps one of the most colorful and bright cafes. Going back to its roots, you have a capoeira rota in the middle with the shirtless musicians playing various traditional instruments, palm trees behind them. And this is pretty hard to see, but on random rounds if you look up closely, way up above the blue palm tree you can see Bao, a member of Team Athena. There's a reflective checkerboard floor that mirrors the lights from above, helping add to that more playful atmosphere. Despite those elements though, I would say that the theming leans more heavily on the Chinese side. First of all, you have the guardian lion statues or fu dogs on either side of the band. Originating from China, these come in male and female pairs that are meant to represent luck and prosperity. Usually the lion on the left is male with a ball in hand, and the female is on the right meant to be restraining a cub. In this case, it just looks like it's the same image but mirrored on either side. You can also see Richard Mayer wiping down the one on the left in rounds 1 and 2. Behind the musicians is a large golden dragon with a pearl in its mouth wrapped around this mountain water fountain structure. A chandelier and colorful moving spotlights sweep the floor below, making this feel more like a dance floor or a show. There are people peeking out and watching the match through Chinese-style windows on the sides. You can only see their silhouettes, since that's not only probably easier to draw, but also less distracting to the player so you don't have a KOF 94 situation on your hands. On either end, you also have pillars engraved with a cloud pattern. This particular style of pattern is called Shengyun, or auspicious clouds. It's an ancient design that has been seen in China for thousands of years as early as 2000 BC, and the reason why they're associated with good luck is because clouds brought rain, which then allows crops to grow. This association has continued up to this day, where you can see this pattern often found on furniture, art, and clothing. These pillars also have lanterns strung up next to them, with the characters for Pao Pao Cafe written on them, with it roughly translating to bag or purse tavern, so it doesn't make a ton of sense here. Scattered on the walls are various neon signs, such as the Pao Pao Cafe one on the right and up top on the left. This is actually the same design as the one we saw in the KOF 11 endings, with palm trees on either side. Nearby are also the double happiness symbols in neon. There's one that, quite frankly, I can't read, and also a sign that has a character for fortune and smaller lettering at the top, and then the phrase at the bottom which translates to warm welcome. Finally, there's 2 that say Capoeira Show, seemingly referring to the musicians in the center. KOF 13 does a great job making Pao Pao Cafe a magnetic spot that people would want to hang out in. The blend of Brazilian meets Chinese meshes really well due to the colorful layer that sits on top of everything here. Out of all the stages, this one has perhaps the most vibrant party atmosphere, emphasized by the moving lights, neon signs, and excited NPC silhouettes in the background. At first glance, the KOF 15 version of Pao Pao Cafe looks like it takes place outdoors with a tropical theme, but on closer look we can see that it takes place inside. In certain team endings for KOF 15, you can see a sign that says Pao Pao Resort, which to me implies Pao Pao Cafe is part of this wider complex. The entire stage is encased in a glass dome with paneling on the ceiling and greenery hanging from wooden beams. Despite not being an outdoor stage, the theming is tiki bar inspired, and to that you have the roof of the bar covered in straw and fairy lights strewn around. Another main focus of the stage is the huge stone statue with blue light coming out of its mouth, which reminds me a lot of the Pao Pao Cafe in Fatal Fury 3, but this particular statue does look different and has no nose ring. While in that particular game, I wasn't entirely sure if this was a reference to Mudman from World Heroes. In this version, it definitely is, since it has red around the eyes, mouth and nose, and Mudman's symbol on its forehead. By the mouth, you have 2 small stone statues on either side, which to me doesn't seem too traditional and comes off as more playful and modern. There are musicians playing drums, and combined with the masks they're wearing, which look like the huge stone statues, I'm getting pre-Columbian, Mesoamerican, maybe Aztec vibes from this stage. You also have a pillar inscribed with intricate designs on the left. With this being a bar though, you still have modern elements like the neon Pao Pao Cafe sign on the far right. This is probably the most recognizable version of the logo, and we see this exact design in the opening intro of the KOF 94 stage and in Pao Pao Cafe 6 from Street Fighter 6 as well. In front of the sign, there are barrels with decorative KOF baskets placed on top. Especially when compared to past versions, this one has a ton of KOF imagery, with KOF flags hanging from the ceiling, some on top of the tiki bar, and others hanging from the barrels. The rainbow lights scattered around the stage illuminate the stone floor in various hues of purple, blue, and yellow. Bob Wilson and Richard Mayer once again make an appearance watching over your fight. People-wise, this is probably one of the more quiet Pao Pao locations at nighttime, since the crowd isn't as jam-packed as we might normally see. However, this is an all 3D engine, and it might have been hard to work around hardware and budget limitations to do that in such a small space. The song here, called How About a Trip to Pao Pao Cafe, I think is very appropriate for a bar setting. It's a jazz piece with strings, xylophone, woodblock, sax, and piano. I will say you don't really hear a ton of drums in the background, so I wouldn't say that the musicians are contributing to whatever we're hearing here. I think the song and stage vibe go together seamlessly, with the music almost reminiscent of something you'd hear in a speakeasy, but still fast-paced enough to where it can get you hyped up for a fight. Let's talk about another miscellaneous appearance of Pao Pao Cafe outside of fighting games. SNK vs Capcom Card Fighters Clash 2000 is a Neo Geo Pocket spin-off title where you use characters from both games' IPs to duke it out in card game form. The title has an overworld where you can walk around, and inside the Neo Geo world building, after completing the game, you can enter Pao Pao Cafe. There's neon lettered signs towards the bar area in the back, along with various card tables on the right. There's also people in the left corner who I presume are playing the drums, based on the dialogue from this person and the kanji above, which translates to capoeira music. And spotlights scattered around, but otherwise not much to see here since it's a fairly small area. Standing in front of the bar is G Mantle, who at one point was meant to be the SNK mascot, but here he's called Mask. The tune in this place might sound a little familiar. It's a chiptune version of the Fatal Fury 3 Pao Pao Cafe song. I've also seen some sources online claim that Pao Pao Cafe is in either the second or fourth entry of the SNK dating sim called Days of Memory on the DS. After looking through those two games specifically, Pao Pao Cafe is not on the list of locations you can travel to in-game. There is a bar, but it's called Illusion, which is from KOF 95 and not Pao Pao Cafe. Given that these games are Japanese only and hard for me to play, perhaps there's an ending event or something that I missed that has this location. Finally, Street Fighter 6 has Pao Pao Cafe 6. You have the stylized cafe logo on the floor, which matches the neon sign on the left and back right. This version seems to take after the Chinese locations, perhaps because they're more well-known or more iconic within the series, and to that you have pillars with dragons wrapped around. There are standing ones on the right side that look pretty creepy with their beady orange eyes, which reminds me of the CVS stage intro. You've got the return of the Chinese-style lanterns that again say Pao Pao Cafe on the left, but this time with slightly different kanji that translates more to like Bubbles Dining Hall. You've also got crystal chandeliers overhead, red fencing, and people cheering from the balcony above. Unlike KOF 15, the stage is pretty crowded, but it has lower poly 3D models, and the majority of NPCs are towards the back, probably for hardware reasons. Speaking of NPCs, there's one in particular I'd like to highlight sitting down at a table to the right. This particular man looks to be recording Joe on his phone, who's standing right by these dragon statues. Joe is a Muay Thai champ from Fatal Fury, serving as one of the 3 playable protagonists from the first game. After a hard knockdown, the table the NPC is sitting at breaks and he stands up, but seems like he doesn't care much because he's still really into the fight, all while Joe seems surprised. The audience reacts when you do a bigger move, though the cameos may or may not depending on who they are. This dragon on the right can have its nose broken off by the player, but if this doesn't happen naturally, then at the end of the first round, Joe does a hurricane upper and knocks it off. You'll also see him doing his victory pose, with him kneeling on the ground and hands up. Not only can you break the table on the right, most of these ones in the front can also be fucked up one way or another as the match goes on, depending on how close you are to these objects. You can flip the salmon on the table or make the meat fly in the air. This particular item is called barbecue and is one of the drops from the original final fight. The portion size is absolutely huge. Sticking out of the meat is a small white flag with a red star, which might be a reverse reference to Terry's logo, which is a white star on a red background. Speaking of which, we can see a flag with that exact coloring on top of these hot dogs, also from Final Fight. There's a ton of hot dogs and other food piled up on these tables, but for some reason no one is sitting at them. Perhaps this food is for the performers. You have waitresses holding hot dogs and beers dressed in qipao or cheongsam, which is a one-piece garment with a high collar and inspired from the ethnic dress of the Manchu people. They were the ethnic group in power during the last dynasty of China, the Qing dynasty. Developed sometime in the 1920s, over time the dress became more form-fitting and fashionable, often being worn by women in the early to mid-20th century and as everyday wear until the 1960s. Nowadays, more formal versions can be worn to weddings and used as uniforms, hence the waitresses wearing them as part of their work attire here. On the flip side, the waiters are dressed in Western-style black slacks, white dress shirts, vests, and bow ties, which seems to be standard fare at most of the Pao Pao Cafe locations, given that Richard and Bob wear these outfits quite often, and you see them on various stages. Next to the bar are barrels that you can break, and opening these reveals a bunch of small chicks that run off screen to the right. This is a reference to Duck King, where in Fatal Fury Special, you can break barrels with his chicks that run out. On Andy's stage, there are a few on screen behind the boat your characters are fighting on, and funnily enough, a similar reference is in Terry's stage in City of the Wolves. As for the cameos in the middle, center stage performing, we have Roxy, Axel, and 2P, who are all regular enemies from Final Fight. Roxy is barely a palette swap of Poison. Sitting in front of them is Blue Mary, Terry's gal pal from Fatal Fury and King of Fighters. She has a ton of food on her table and a beer on the other side, which makes me think she might be saving it for Terry. Maybe they're on a date or something and he's in the bathroom, assuming he's not on screen. Or maybe Andy will be sitting here once Mai gets added in. I could be wrong here, but that's the price for doing this video sooner than later, I guess. Hey, Babe Ruthless from the future here, posting this just after the Mai drop, and like I thought, they added in Andy, but he's standing next to Joe. After the first round, he'll just shake his head and cross his arms, almost like he's disappointed at your performance. If you win the match with a super, he'll strike a pose like he's powering up, which is a key pose he's done in the Fatal Fury series before. And when the match ends, he does his victory pose along with Joe, where he raises his fist into the air. If the table gets flipped, Andy reacts to this pizza flying at him, but it just narrowly misses, and then he proceeds to just watch the match. Also, while Joe and Blue Mary are present in the walkout, interestingly enough, Andy wasn't added to this. Alright, now back to Past Me. Blue Mary is sipping on a blue and red cocktail, which you can also see in her Fatal Fury and Rebout Fatal Fury ending. She even references this drink recipe in World Tour mode, but doesn't disclose the full thing. Thankfully for us, we got the internet. The ingredients for this drink can be found in what I assume is an art book, with one of the pages uploaded and translated by Synchronize on Twitter. A Blue Mary is made with 30 milliliters of gin, 10 milliliters lemon juice, 2 spoons of sugar, and 2 scoops of blue curacao, topped with sparkling wine. I guess the red at the bottom is the wine and it sinks to the bottom, otherwise not sure why the drink would be blue at the top. While Blue Mary does have a drink in hand, she doesn't sit still and just sip on it while waiting around. She stands up, does different victory poses, and also cheers. In round 2, Blue Mary hops onto the stage and starts singing, where she remains for the rest of the fight. This actually isn't her first appearance as a singer on stage though. There was a Reel About Fatal Fury special animated music video called Blue Mary's Blues that featured her as a vocalist as well. During the final round, it's super brief, but in the final 20 seconds, you'll see Kim flying through the stage, seemingly defying gravity and physics. He could be flying, he could be farting, who knows. This is a cute little reference to Fatal Fury Special with the train stage, where at the same time you'll see Kim zoom by, same sprite and everything. Funnily enough, this goofy little Easter egg is the only cameo of Kim in a Pao Pao Cafe stage as far as I can tell. In his walkout, regardless of stage, if playing as Terry, fake Andy will come and greet player 1 Terry, while fake Joe will greet player 2 Terry. These aren't the legit Andy and Joe, they're just fans of them that are cosplaying, named George Azuma and Andres, who you meet in World Tour mode at Pao Pao Cafe, along with fake Blue Mary Marilyn. However, the real Blue Mary, her dog Anton, and Joe make actual appearances in World Tour mode as well. A referential NPC called Alwis Luz is also present, who bears a striking resemblance to Lau from Fatal Fury First Contact, who you can see in a cutscene getting beat up. From the map, we can assume that this new grand opening of Pao Pao Cafe 6 takes place in Metro City, somewhere in the northeastern part of the United States. If we look at the PS4 or standard Fighting Ground background density version, we can see Roxy is singing alone, which gives an impression that she kinda hijacked the stage versus she was hired to be there in the crowded version. We still see some of the NPCs present during the stage walkout, but on the actual stage they disappear. The man sitting at the table looking at Joe is gone, along with all the other waitresses and NPCs towards the front. The purpose of doing this is to help reduce strain on hardware if you're on console or PC. This makes sense because now we have all 3D assets which are more resource intensive than the previous sprite-based backgrounds. In round 2 though, Blue Mary still goes up on stage and they sometimes do a little coordinated dance despite the smaller crowd. I would consider this to be like a slow night variant of the original stage. The music playing seems to be original and not based on any prior Pao Pao Cafe song. The sound of flutes in the beginning, percussion, and vocalization convey a more tribal sound, but once a synth comes in with the main melody, the other instruments gradually fade away, and you hear modern elements like record scratching noises. Underlying all that is a funky groove beat that carries the original tone of the piece throughout. I would have loved to hear a remixed throwback song personally, but I do think this is pretty in line with the other stage tunes from this OST. In my eyes, this guest stage is a worthy successor to all of the past Pao Pao Cafe stages we've seen, mainly because there are so many cameos and Easter eggs. I will say though that the floor is nowhere near as extravagant as some of the other previous versions, and I do prefer those more colorful looks. But this Chinese-inspired version is probably the most familiar one to most people, making it a safe choice. The music is similarly good, but nothing crazy or too out of the box. Honestly, I would probably think the stage is just okay if it weren't for all the little references that take it to the next level. So given that we just talked about 10 different Pao Pao Cafe locations, let's discuss which one of these are the canonical 6 locations, assuming that there are only 6, which I'll circle back to later. What I can say is that all these cafes are scattered throughout the timeline. Also, KOF is a crossover of SNK titles, so it's not in the same universe as Fatal Fury, which makes things a little more complicated. That doesn't even account for Street Fighter 6. For the sake of this video, I'm gonna assume that the Fatal Fury locations and KOF locations are in the same universe as Street Fighter 6, given that those cafes are also numbered, and because Terry is originally from Fatal Fury. Thankfully, number 1 and 2 are fairly straightforward. It's Pao Pao Cafe 1 in Southtown and Pao Pao Cafe 2. After this, the numbering stops, so it's a bit tricky to say from here on out. The third location is definitely Mexico, since KOF 94 and 94 Rebout both take place there. You see references to 94 in the 94 Rebout stage, so clearly they're linked in some way. From that perspective, they could be the same location, but they're just such wildly different stages that I find it hard to definitively say these are the same place. Maybe Richard and Bob bought out the building next to the KOF 94 one and then renovated the whole thing, which then became the 94 Rebout stage. This is assuming it's the same place, given that there's only 6 canonical locations. I kinda had to combine some. So that's really the only explanation that makes sense for me here, and that's what I'm going with. Based on endings we see of the entrance of the cafe in KOF 11 and 13, these are pretty much identical and I think the same location. They're definitely a Pao Pao Cafe location. I mean, come on, read the sign. But in KOF 11's alley stage, the sign above says nightclub, so either this is a totally different offshoot location, or it's part of the same Pao Pao Cafe from the ending at 11, but just a different entrance or a rear entrance. Either way, the cafe in the endings is Pao Pao Cafe number 4. Then you have 15 as its own separate cafe, the theme being very different from all of the past locations. This could be somewhere in America or Mexico, since it's part of the wider Pao Pao resort system and the climate seems much more tropical, but it's definitely not Southtown. And then, of course, Pao Pao Cafe 6. But we still have CVS and Card Clash to explain, which doesn't fit into this neat little timeline I've created. The Card Clash one could really be any location with capoeira musicians, so that one can be explained fairly easily. There's a sign that says capoeira music on stage, which is similar to signs in the KOF 13 location, so that's one possibility. Capcom Vs Snk is a little harder to figure out. According to Terry's story mode, CVS is mentioned as a canon event, and this one looks different than past stages, so we can't just write this off as being an alternate timeline. One theory is that it might be a reimagining or renovation of an existing Pao Pao location, perhaps the Fatal Fury 1 stage. Alternatively, maybe the official numbers are only given to American locations. If that's the case, if we remove the KOF 94 and 94 Rebout locations, which for sure take place in Mexico, and replace it with CVS, that would make 6 American stages. Though, to be fair, we don't know for sure where all these are located. Also, I know earlier I assumed that there were only canonically 6 stages, but for all we know, there's a Pao Pao Cafe 7 and 8, but it's just never been outwardly stated. Pao Pao 6 could just be a cute reference to this cafe being in Street Fighter 6. Regardless of which ones are canonical and which ones aren't though, what we can say for sure is that Pao Pao Cafe is doing very well for itself, opening restaurants and clubs all over the globe. Whether there are more, I can't say. But according to my headcanon, there are 6 confirmed locations, the games they occur in being Fatal Fury 1, Fatal Fury 3, KOF 94 and 94 Rebout, KOF 11 and 13, KOF 15, and Street Fighter 6. I saw sources saying that Pao Pao Cafe is the stage that has the most playable appearances in fighting games, but I strongly believe this isn't true. Ryu's stage from Street Fighter 2 is playable in even more games, and if we were to pick another SNK stage, Geese Tower has more as well. But perhaps I can dive into that another time. The concept of Pao Pao Cafe is amazing because I love the idea of fighters hanging out here after a long day, regardless if they're good guys or bad guys. It's a neutral zone, therefore representative of the entire world of Fatal Fury and KOF, since it's the hangout spot for everyone to kick back. Having the stage appear across multiple universes and timelines just gives this world so much more personality and really lets us get to know its characters on a more personal level.